I was standing in my wedding dress when my father's voice sliced through the room, calm and cruel. "I gave your wedding fund to your sister. She deserves it more." The words echoed louder than the silence that followed, because that was the moment my phone buzzed with the message I already felt in my bones. My fiancé wasn't coming. No explanation. No goodbye. Just absence. My hands shook as I stared at my reflection, mascara burning like acid tears, realizing every person I trusted had chosen me as the sacrifice. They thought I would break quietly. They were wrong. Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from, because I need to know how many of us have survived moments like this. The room smelled like lilies and hairspray, that cloying sweetness meant to signal celebration, but it made my stomach turn. I stood at the end of the aisle in a wedding dress that suddenly felt like a costume, the lace tied around my ribs, my pulse thudding so loud I was sure the front rows could hear it. Faces blurred together, 100 expressions flickering between pity and curiosity. Whispers crawled over my skin. Where is he? Is this a joke? My hands clenched around my bouquet until the stems bit into my palms, green and wet, grounding me in the most humiliating moment of my life. The altar was empty. No groom. Just space where a promise was supposed to stand, and every second stretched thin, cruel, exposing me like a spotlight I hadn't agreed to step into. I told myself there had to be a reason, some delay, some harmless disaster on the way, but my phone was heavy in my hand, silent except for the vibration that finally came like a gunshot. One message. No name, just words that felt rehearsed and cold. I can't do this. I stared at the screen, rereading it until the letters blurred, my chest tightening as shame flooded in hot and sharp. This wasn't confusion. This was abandonment. Public, surgical, intentional. The kind of betrayal that doesn't scream but leaves you standing there while everyone watches you bleed internally. I felt exposed in a way I never had before, stripped not just of love but of dignity. The officiant cleared his throat, a small sound that echoed like judgment. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped softly, someone shifting uncomfortably, already planning how to retell this family drama later. I could feel the humiliation settling in, heavy and suffocating, a familiar weight from growing up in a toxic family where disappointment always landed on me. My mother's face was frozen, lips pressed tight, eyes darting anywhere but mine. My father didn't move at all. He just stared forward, jaw set, as if this empty altar were a mild inconvenience instead of my life cracking open. I searched their faces for outrage, for anger on my behalf, but there was none. Just restraint. Control. The kind that comes when people know more than they're saying. A slow, sick realization crept in, threading through the shock. They weren't surprised. This wasn't news to them. My humiliation wasn't an accident, it was a performance they had already rehearsed privately. That thought hurt worse than the message on my phone. It rewrote everything in an instant, turning this wedding from a tragedy into an execution staged by people who were supposed to protect me. I took a step back, the hem of my dress whispering against the floor, and that was when my father finally moved. He leaned toward my mother, his voice low but clear enough to reach me, cutting through the air with casual cruelty. I told you this would happen. He said it like he was right, like this was proof of my failure rather than their family betrayal. Something inside me snapped quietly, not into hysteria, but into a cold, observing stillness. This wasn't just emotional abuse, it was a pattern, one I had been trained to accept since childhood. The room buzzed with restrained chaos as my mother stood, forcing a tight smile, murmuring apologies to guests who didn't know where to look. I stood there alone, my revenge fantasies still too raw to shape, my thoughts splintered between panic and a growing, dangerous clarity. I saw it then, the power imbalance I'd lived under, the narcissistic family dynamics that always demanded my silence. My wedding fund, the promises, the conditional love, it all fit together too neatly. This wasn't about love failing. This was about control, about teaching me my place. I excused myself without really speaking, my voice distant even to my own ears, and walked down the aisle alone, each step another layer of dignity peeled away. I could feel eyes on my back, feel the story writing itself in their heads. Poor thing. What did she do wrong? No one asked why he left. No one asked why my family let me stand there. Outside the main hall, the air was cooler, sharper, and I leaned against the wall, breathing in shallow bursts, trying not to unravel completely. That was when I heard my sister. Her voice floated down the corridor, soft and trembling, and for a split second, hope flared painfully in my chest. Maybe she was angry for me. Maybe someone was. I held my breath, listening, my heart pounding with fragile anticipation. But then her words reached me clearly, and the hope curdled into something darker. I didn't think it would happen like this, she whispered, followed by a quiet sob that sounded almost relieved. I pressed my hand to my mouth, understanding crashing over me with brutal force as I realized she wasn't crying for me at all. He was always her defender, even when she didn't need defending. Even when I was the one left bleeding from wounds she caused. I used to think love was quiet and fair, but in our house, love had a name, and it wasn't mine. I sat in the same living room I once tiptoed through as a child, listening to the laughter always erupting around her, the silence pressing on me like punishment. Back then, I'd wonder if I was too much or not enough. But now, after being left alone at the altar while my father held my sister's hand in the front row, like a united front against my humiliation, I no longer wondered. I remembered. I remembered the birthdays where she got jewelry and I got life lessons. The vacations where she was the princess and I was the luggage. The praise she soaked in, the patience she abused, the endless indulgence disguised as understanding. They called it compassion. I call it grooming. The golden daughter never had to be good, just golden. There was no warmth in his voice when I confronted him. No regret. Only that tired sigh he used when I asked for fairness, like I was annoying him by expecting to be treated like a daughter, too. It's not about the money, he said, his eyes flicking to the floor. It's about loyalty. Loyalty. Like I'd broken some silent vow by daring to build a future that didn't orbit around them. Like loving someone outside this family was treason. That's when I knew they didn't just allow my fiancé to walk away. They helped. Enabled. Encouraged. And I'd been so starved for approval, I missed the signs. Even as a child, I noticed the way my mother's compliments to me were always edged in warnings. You're smart, but don't get arrogant. You're pretty, but your sister, she's striking. Backhanded affection, like a dog being patted with one hand and kicked with the other. I internalized it. I believed that maybe if I were more obedient, more selfless, more silent, I'd be loved the way she was. I became the girl who over-apologized. Who didn't ask for help. Who earned everything and still felt like a thief in her own life. And she? She learned she never had to say sorry, not once. Her mistakes were forgiven before she made them. The wedding fund was supposed to be mine, not as a gift, but as something I earned. I built my career without their help, never leaned on them financially, never demanded anything. But they dangled that fund like a prize, a pat on the head for being a good daughter. Until it was rerouted. Quietly. No discussion. Just a single email from the bank that showed the withdrawal and a transfer to an account under her name. She needed it more, my mother had said when I asked. She's been through a lot. What she meant was, she cried louder. She looked prettier when she cried. She made herself helpless, and helplessness, in this house, was currency. I made the mistake of being capable. The betrayal wasn't sharp and sudden. It was slow. Eroding. Like a tide that pulls you under while you're still waving from the shore. Even the way they looked at me, with that tired disappointment, like I had become difficult, showed me this was never about fairness. It was about roles. And I had stopped playing mine. So I began collecting. Not things. Not evidence. But moments. Recollections. Financial choices that didn't make sense. Business transactions that connected my father's firm to my ex's startup, a startup that mysteriously survived despite being in debt. The clues were buried, but they were there. And every breadcrumb hardened me. Every ignored birthday. Every secret loan. Every time I was told I was too emotional, too intense, too calculating, all while they made moves behind my back that would make a mobster blush. I realized revenge doesn't start with a plan. It starts with a shift. A refusal. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped defending my hurt. I let them call me distant. Cold. Dramatic. Because it's easier for people like them to villainize you than admit they broke you. And that's fine. I wanted them to underestimate me. To think I was shattered and stunned and silent. I let the silence settle. I let the golden daughter keep her throne. Because I wasn't here to reclaim anything. I was here to dismantle it. My sister's tears in the hallway that night, the ones I overheard after being left at the altar, weren't for me. They were for herself. Because she knew something was unraveling. Because for once, her lies weren't working. Because for once, I wasn't playing the scapegoat. And the worst part? A piece of me still wanted to comfort her. That's how deep the programming runs. But no more. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the good girl waiting for scraps of love from a table set only for her sister. I was done waiting. I was watching. And I was ready. The next time I stepped into my father's study, I wasn't asking questions. I was taking notes. He didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. That's always been his flaw, he confuses arrogance for power. He thought my silence was surrender. He mistook my distance for despair. But I was learning his language now. I was watching where the money went. Who signed what? And why loyalty mattered more than blood. So when he finally said it, it's not about the money, it's about loyalty, I didn't react. I nodded. I smiled. And I knew I had just unlocked the one truth that would bring them all down. Because loyalty? Loyalty can be weaponized. And mine was gone. The door behind me creaked. I turned, expecting emptiness. But my sister was there, her face pale, her eyes wide. She had heard him. And in that moment, something cracked in her too. But not in the way I'd hoped. Not guilt. Not sorrow. It was fear. I stopped crying the day I opened the account statements. Grief evaporated into something colder, sharper, almost clean. The wedding fund had always been spoken about like a favor, a reward I should be grateful for, a generous gesture from a father who liked to remind me how much he'd done for me. But numbers don't care about tone or history or guilt. Numbers tell the truth if you know how to read them. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the house too quiet, my abandoned wedding shoes still by the door like an accusation, and I followed the paper trail they never thought I'd look for. Each click felt like peeling back skin. This wasn't a gift. It was an account opened in my name 15 years ago, structured as a tax-sheltered trust, my social security number stamped neatly at the top. The money was legally mine. Always had been. My hands trembled, not from sadness this time, but from the slow, dawning realization that my humiliation had been financed by my own inheritance. That word settled heavily in my chest. Inheritance. It reframed everything. All those years of being told to wait, to be patient, to not ask questions because it's handled. All those subtle reminders that I owed them loyalty. This wasn't parental support. This was financial manipulation, polished and disguised as love. A narcissistic family specialty. I scrolled through transaction histories, my eyes catching on dates that didn't line up, withdrawals that spiked suddenly in the months leading up to the wedding. The balance dropped in chunks, each one a small theft I hadn't consented to. I whispered the numbers out loud, grounding myself, forcing clarity over rage. The name on the transfer account made my stomach lurch. My sister. Not a joint account. Not an emergency family pool. Her personal account. I stared at it for a long time, the silence pressing in, my mind replaying her hallway tears, her carefully cultivated helplessness. Emotional abuse has a financial language too, and she spoke it fluently. I pulled up older statements, tracing patterns like a forensic analyst, and the story emerged slowly, undeniably. She'd accessed the funds without authorization. No power of attorney. No trustee override. Just a signature that wasn't hers to use. My father's signature appeared on the approval line, dated on a day I remembered clearly, my birthday. The irony was almost elegant in its cruelty. I felt something shift then, a quiet recalibration. The shame I'd carried since being left at the altar loosened its grip. This wasn't a story about me being unlovable or disposable. This was about control, about a toxic family system that rewarded dependence and punished independence. I'd stepped out of line by building a life that didn't need them, by choosing a future that wasn't sanctioned. So they pulled the only lever they thought mattered, money. And when that wasn't enough, they made sure I'd be publicly humiliated, abandoned in front of witnesses, so I'd come crawling back, smaller, easier to manage. I opened a new document and started listing everything I knew. Dates. Amounts. Names. The process steadied me, each fact a brick laid carefully into place. Revenge doesn't roar at first, it whispers. It organizes. I remembered every time my father insisted on handling paperwork for me, every time he brushed off my questions with a smile that never reached his eyes. You wouldn't understand, he'd say, and I'd believed him, because believing him was easier than confronting the possibility that my own parents saw me as a resource to be managed, not a daughter to be protected. The deeper I dug, the more the betrayal multiplied. There were tax advantages tied to the account that now sat compromised, penalties that could surface if the withdrawals were flagged. Not just theft, but risk. Risk he'd taken in my name without asking. My sister hadn't just stolen money, she'd exposed me legally. The realization made my chest tighten, anger curling hot and focused. This wasn't sibling rivalry or emotional neglect anymore. This was actionable. This was leverage. I thought about confronting them, imagined the arguments, the gaslighting, the practiced denial. I could hear my mother already, telling me not to make a big deal, not to tear the family apart over money. As if they hadn't already done that the moment they decided my loyalty was conditional. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet stretch. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was standing on solid ground, watching a storm gather somewhere else. Control returned in small, deliberate steps. I backed up every document to a secure drive. I printed copies and slid them into a folder, the weight of it comforting in my hands. Evidence has a gravity all its own. I wasn't plotting dramatic confrontations or shouting matches. This wasn't about emotional revenge. This was about consequences. Financial manipulation leaves trails, and trails can be followed by people who don't care about family loyalty, only legality. The irony wasn't lost on me, the fund meant to celebrate my marriage was now financing my awakening. I thought about the altar, the empty space beside me, and instead of pain, I felt something like gratitude. If he hadn't left, if they hadn't pushed so hard, I might never have looked. I might have stayed obedient, blind, grateful for crumbs. Betrayal has a way of sharpening vision. That night, I slept for the first time without dreams. In the morning, I made coffee and opened my calendar, my movements calm, almost methodical. I searched for attorneys specializing in trusts and family financial disputes, reading profiles carefully, choosing someone whose reputation leaned toward precision rather than drama. I filled out a consultation request, attached nothing, said very little. Just enough. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment, the old reflex to hesitate, to ask permission, flaring weakly. Then I pressed it. The confirmation email landed softly in my inbox, unremarkable to anyone else. To me, it sounded like a door locking behind me. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sister. I closed my laptop, picked up the folder, and placed it somewhere safe. Outside, the world moved on, unaware. Inside, I smiled for the first time since the wedding, because the money they'd used to control me had just bought them something far more expensive. Silence. He didn't even look guilty when I saw him again, just uncomfortable, like being forced to speak to me was a mild inconvenience. I stood there, still wearing pieces of the woman I had once been, fiancé, bride, believer, and he looked at me like I was a stranger. But strangers don't know your morning habits, your fears, your dreams. Strangers don't touch you like he once did. He knew me. And he still chose to believe the worst version of me. The version someone else fed him. The first clue came in a text. Not from him, but from one of his friends, someone who didn't owe me loyalty but had enough humanity to ask if what he heard was true. He said you stole from your dad. That you pressured him for money. That you were planning to elope and cut your family out completely. I read it twice. Then again. Then it felt like breathing had become manual, shallow, artificial. My heart didn't just break, it recoiled. Because it wasn't just a betrayal. It was slander. And worse, it was effective. I opened our old conversations, looking for the moment it changed. For weeks leading up to the wedding, his tone had been off. Short. Hesitant. When I asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off. Just work. But it wasn't work. It was war. A quiet war, already lost before I realized I was even under attack. I started tracing the origin. Who had access to both of us? Who stood to gain the most from breaking us apart? My mother? No, too subtle for her. My father? Possible, but too invested in appearing noble. And then it clicked. My sister. The golden daughter. The one who had already taken my wedding fund like it was hers by birthright. She didn't want to destroy my life because she was vindictive. She did it because she was conditioned to believe that what's mine should always be hers. Including him. I searched through every thread. Emails, old shared documents, calendar events. The patterns were small but revealing. My ex had forwarded my bank transfer email to his personal account 2 days after she accessed the wedding fund. He knew. Before I did. And he didn't ask. Didn't confront me. Just filed it under red flag and built a wall around his conscience. But what sealed it was the voicemail I almost deleted. A clipped, whispered message from one of his coworkers, maybe drunk, maybe scared. You should know what she told him, about your therapy. She said you were hiding debts. That you had breakdowns. That your family was afraid of what you might do. My legs nearly buckled. Not because it wasn't true, I had gone to therapy, yes. I had fought through depression, through anxiety, through a lifetime of being treated like a spare. But I never hid it. I was healing. And she weaponized my healing against me. That's what enraged me most. Not that he believed her lies. But that he knew enough of my truth to question them, and chose not to. He wanted easy. Safe. Pretty. And my trauma was messy. My honesty, too raw. So he left me with a phantom version of myself, shaped by her poison, and disappeared into silence. I saved everything. Every forwarded message. Every time-stamped login. The screenshots. The voice messages. Every breadcrumb she didn't know she was leaving behind. Because now I knew, this wasn't just emotional abuse. This was coordinated character assassination. And I had the receipts. I stopped trying to call him. He had made his decision. But that didn't mean I wouldn't speak. Just not to him. I began compiling a digital dossier. Dates. Screenshots. A full chronological timeline. One piece at a time, the puzzle formed an image I couldn't unsee. She had been planting doubt in him for months, starting subtly, she works too much. She never talks about your future. She doesn't tell us anything anymore. Then escalating, she's using you. She has money problems. She's emotionally unstable. All carefully phrased to sound like concern. All lies. But it wasn't just about sabotaging a relationship. It was about control. She was securing her place, both in the family hierarchy and in the financial fallout. Because if I married him, I'd gain independence, power, maybe even protection. If I left, I'd be desperate. Alone. Easier to manage. She didn't just want me humiliated. She wanted me weakened. And he gave her the perfect cover. The man who ghosted his bride? Easy to paint as the victim of a manipulative woman. Easier than admitting he was manipulated himself. And what burned deeper was realizing how many people watched it happen. My parents knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough to do something. Say something. But they stayed quiet. Silent co-conspirators in a scheme to keep the family narrative intact, golden daughter adored, flawed daughter discarded. I closed my laptop, fingers trembling not with grief anymore, but with resolve. This wasn't about getting him back. I didn't want him back. I wanted the truth back. My name. My voice. My version of events. So I printed everything. Stored backups. Created a master folder titled, The Lie They Told Him. And then I stared at the wall for a long time. Let the silence fill me. Let it strip me down. There was no space left for heartbreak now. Only calculation. She had underestimated me. They all had. They thought I would break and beg and vanish. But I was still here. And I had leverage. Not just emotional receipts, but legal ones. Because when lies start interfering with money, with business, with written communications, it becomes more than betrayal, it becomes liability. I stared at the last message he ever sent me. Just one line. I hope you find peace. It used to gut me. Now I saw it for what it was, a man choosing comfort over confrontation. Peace wasn't his to offer. But truth? That was mine to take back. And I would. The next morning, I logged into our shared wedding planning portal, one I hadn't touched in weeks. I clicked on the vendor invoices, the canceled bookings, the refunded deposits. And there, tucked inside a note from the event coordinator, was a message I hadn't seen before. Your sister said to reroute all communication through her. Dated 3 weeks before the wedding. My stomach dropped. She hadn't just sabotaged the relationship. She had orchestrated it. And I finally knew why. I wasn't the one she wanted to ruin. I was just collateral. She was after something bigger. The inheritance. They always told me I was the quiet one. That I kept too much inside. That I didn't speak up enough, didn't fight back enough, didn't ask for what I deserved. I believed them for a long time until I realized quiet girls aren't weak. We're watchers. We're recorders. We're survivors in a house built on shifting truths. And the thing about silence? It teaches you to listen. To see patterns. To read between the lines of family lies and sisterly smiles. While they played loud and dirty, I learned to be still and strategic. And now, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. Grief was no longer useful. Anger wasn't either. This wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about execution. So I turned my pain into pages, PDFs, spreadsheets, bank records, emails, voicemail transcriptions, shared logins, wedding vendor correspondence. I built my archive like a case file. Not just because I needed the truth, but because I needed proof. The golden daughter's hands weren't clean, and neither were my parents'. And when people like them leave fingerprints, they do it thinking no one will dust for them. I did. I started with the financials. The wedding fund was never a gift, it was a tax-sheltered custodial account, structured in my name to reduce my father's business liability. It had clauses, legal language buried in the paperwork, that named me as beneficiary but gave him temporary control. Until I turned 30. I was 29. Days away from full ownership when the money vanished into my sister's hands. But here's the detail they missed: transferring it without my consent triggered a breach of the custodial contract. That wasn't just betrayal, it was financial misconduct. And in some cases, fraud. My lawyer, let's call her Eliza, was sharp-eyed and steel-voiced. A woman who didn't blink when I laid out the timeline. "They thought you'd be too emotional to do anything," she said, her tone clean as a scalpel. "They counted on your silence." We both knew what that meant. I'd weaponize my silence. Turn it into court dates, audit requests, a discreet call to the financial oversight board that regulated my father's company. No fireworks. Just formal, official pressure. The kind that stains reputations in the quietest, most permanent way. I filed everything under my personal legal vault. Multiple backups. One in the cloud, one external, one with Eliza. Evidence that linked my sister's illegal access to my accounts, thanks to a shared device we once used. She left her thumbprint saved in a backup folder. And the bank login she used? Captured by the system logs, which matched the IP address at our parents' house. Even the time-stamped access lined up with the day she claimed to be out of town. I didn't need to accuse her. I just needed to present the facts. But it wasn't just money. It was reputation. My sister had told lies that led to the collapse of my engagement. Framing me as mentally unstable, greedy, emotionally erratic. All while presenting herself as concerned, protective, innocent. And my fiancé, now ex-fiancé, believed her, because she gave him a version of me that played into his fears. That kind of character defamation isn't just cruel. It's actionable. So I added a slander clause to the complaint. Quietly. Legally. No need for a confrontation. Just documentation. Let them feel the walls shift beneath them when they least expect it. I wasn't the broken one anymore. I was the architect. And revenge? Revenge wasn't a grand gesture. It was methodical. It was a paper trail. A court filing. A frozen account. A reputational nudge to the right journalist at the Financial Review who'd love to expose family-run businesses that misuse custodial structures for personal gain. Every step was deliberate. Every piece of evidence cross-checked. Every claim verifiable. I had moved from victim to witness. From bystander to builder. Still, there was something sacred in the slowness. In the restraint. I didn't scream or threaten. I didn't warn them. That was the power shift. They didn't know what I knew. They still thought I was grieving. Licking wounds. Embarrassed. They thought I was out of moves. But I had spent my entire life studying them. Knowing what made them tick, what they feared. My father feared scandal. My mother feared disgrace. My sister? Exposure. Her entire identity was built on being seen as the good one. The favorite. The perfect. I didn't have to destroy her. I just had to show people who she really was. And that's where the email came in. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic subject line. Just, request for compliance review. Sent from my private legal address to the financial board, copying her name, my father's business, and the bank. Polite. Direct. Laced with legal subtext. The kind of email that doesn't go away quietly. The moment I clicked send, my hand stilled on the keyboard. Not because I was unsure. But because I knew, this was the moment the air would change. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon, they'd feel it. The inquiry. The audit. The internal whispering. The clients asking subtle questions. The staff side-glancing during meetings. Reputation doesn't need fire to burn, it just needs doubt. I leaned back, the room silent except for the hum of the laptop. The same space where I once cried myself to sleep after being abandoned at the altar now felt like a war room. Files spread out. Diagrams drawn. A map of betrayal, turned into a blueprint for justice. For the first time in months, I felt clean. Not innocent. Not untouched. But clear. I knew what they did. I knew how they did it. And now, the system they manipulated would turn its eye on them. Quietly. Efficiently. And the best part? They still thought I was silent. Let them. Because when quiet girls learn the loudest laws, they don't scream. They document. And they send the email that starts the avalanche. It was sent at exactly 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before her birthday. They watched me walk through the aftermath like I was glass, cracked, pathetic, fragile. And I let them. I wore my silence like a shroud, moved through rooms with hollow eyes, let my voice falter when I spoke. I let my hair stay undone, my clothes muted, my presence forgettable. It was all performance. And they ate it up. My mother offered soft, pitying looks over morning coffee, with just enough guilt in her eyes to feel performative. My father didn't look at me at all. And my sister? She smiled like someone who believed she had finally won. It was easier for them to believe I was broken. Because if I was broken, then they weren't monsters. Just misunderstood. Misguided. If I was weak, then they were justified in protecting me. From myself. From shame. From becoming a threat. So I played it perfectly. I kept my tone low. I cried behind closed doors, loud enough to be heard, not loud enough to concern. I declined invitations. I deleted posts. I moved like someone too humiliated to fight, and they relaxed. They stopped whispering when I entered rooms. They started speaking more freely. And in those moments, I collected more than sympathy. I collected evidence. It's always arrogance that blinds them. They thought I was incapable of duplicity, because I had always been transparent. Always the over-explainer, the apologizer, the emotional one. I wasn't built for psychological warfare, or so they thought. They didn't notice when I left my phone on voice memo while my sister vented on a call to a friend. They didn't question why I spent so much time in the attic, going through old boxes, when in reality, I was cataloging every document they forgot existed. They didn't see the USB drives I tucked into hollowed-out books. They didn't hear the camera click in my pocket as I photographed a shredded invoice from my father's company, one that linked a Shell account to a suspicious donation made the same week my wedding fund vanished. They didn't ask questions because they didn't think I could ask any. My father's arrogance was the easiest to exploit. He had always treated me like a disappointment in disguise. A burden that tried too hard. Our conversations were brief, transactional. And now, with my apparent emotional collapse, he no longer felt the need to pretend. He took calls in front of me. Left his briefcase unattended. Tossed documents on the counter while making espresso, never assuming I'd have the nerve to look at them. But I did. And what I found made my pulse slow. A letter. Not scanned. Not digital. Real paper. A formal warning from an internal ethics committee linked to one of his firm's major clients, an asset management group that noticed irregularities in account handling. The letter didn't name him directly. But it referenced a file ID I recognized, one I'd seen on the bank statement tied to my custodial wedding account. They were connected. Sloppily, but enough. It meant the disappearance of my wedding fund wasn't just family betrayal. It was traceable misconduct. Corporate. Legal. I made copies. That night, I sat alone in the garden behind the house, pretending to stare into nothing. My sister's laughter drifted from inside, sharp and high, the sound of someone who believes she's invincible. But I was no longer the sister who envied her confidence. I was the woman holding the scalpel behind her back, waiting for the moment to cut clean. I kept a journal during those days, not to document my pain, but to document their patterns. Times. Conversations. Even glances. I recorded which days my sister wore new clothes despite claiming she was tight on money. When my father's mood shifted after certain calls. When my mother slipped and said, "We thought he'd be better for you than he turned out to be," before pretending she said nothing. It was all data. And data, when stacked, becomes power. They had taught me shame. They fed it to me with every ignored success, every subtle comparison, every sigh when I asked to be treated fairly. But shame no longer sat in my chest. Vengeance did. It didn't roar. It pulsed. Controlled. Alive. I baited my sister one afternoon. Told her through a cracked voice that I blamed myself. That I understood why he left. That I was so sorry for putting the family through this. She smiled like the sun was shining. "You always take everything so personally," she said. Maybe he just didn't want to marry into a mess. She was gloating, but the real revelation was in her word choice, marry into a mess. It confirmed what I suspected. She had made me out to be the liability. She had painted the entire family as the victim of me. But victims don't reroute tens of thousands from a protected account. And they don't leave digital footprints that lead straight to their father's firm. They thought I was drowning. But I was diving. Deep into the wreckage they left behind. And I was surfacing with proof. The final blow came quietly. An email. Not to me. To my father's personal account. Forwarded automatically to his business email, something I'd set up when I briefly worked for his office as a summer intern years ago, and he never removed. It came from a private financial consultancy, a consulting group known for handling quiet cleanup for executives in trouble. The subject line, "Strategic Repositioning Proposal," suggested timing for exit ahead of audit. He was preparing to disappear. Whether to protect himself, shield the company, or distance from me, I didn't care. What mattered was the confirmation, he was guilty. And scared. I forwarded the email to my encrypted archive. My finger hovered over the send key again, this time to the ethics board, with attachments. But I paused. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Instead, I sent it to Eliza. Subject, ready. The response was immediate. One line. Then let's begin. They didn't see it coming. That was the beauty of it, how effortlessly they mistook silence for surrender, shame for retreat. But I'd never retreated. I'd just prepared in shadows. And now the day had come. The day I took everything back. It started with the letter, thick, official, signed. Delivered not to our home, but to my father's firm, where it would hit hardest. It was a formal filing, not a request. A demand for the immediate return of funds unlawfully transferred from my custodial wedding account. Attached were the documents, signed agreements, timestamps, login records, digital fingerprints. Clean. Cold. Legal. Eliza had crafted it with surgical precision, each word weighted, each accusation defensible. The email went out at the same time, CC'd to the board of directors, his compliance officer, and the regulatory body overseeing his firm's license. The second wave was public. I filed a civil complaint. Not just against my father, but my sister, too. Misuse of funds. Identity misuse. Defamation. Emotional and financial damages. The filing hit the court database by noon. By 2 o'clock, the whispers had begun. Former colleagues pinged me with thinly veiled questions. Reporters flagged the case for alerts. And somewhere, deep in her curated online world, my sister's Instagram comments started turning, one follower at a time, into question marks. I didn't need a spotlight. I just needed the right thread to unravel. They underestimated how fast consequences move when the evidence is airtight. The financial firm responded in less than 24 hours. An emergency meeting. Internal review. My father was removed from 2 accounts while the investigation proceeded. His name was quietly scrubbed from the firm's website, replaced with a vague placeholder, management in transition. I imagine his expression when he read that, What it must have felt like to be erased by the same machinery he once weaponized against me. My mother called that night. Her voice was thin, shaking, the sound of someone whose comfort had finally cracked. "What are you doing?" she asked, as if I hadn't warned them all in 1,000 silent ways. "Do you know what this is doing to the family?" The irony nearly made me laugh. This is what was destroying the family? Not the years of favoritism. Not the betrayal. Not the theft. No, my response to those things. My refusal to stay silent. That was the problem. That's always been the problem. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "You should speak to your lawyer," and hung up. The next day, the panic started to show. My sister called 3 times. I didn't answer. Then a message, "We need to talk. Please." I didn't know everything. I didn't think it would go this far. The desperation was soft at first, apology-wrapped manipulation. But when silence met her again, it curdled. The next message came harder. "You're ruining your own family over money?" No. I wasn't ruining anything. I was just unearthing what they buried. The press picked it up by the end of the week. Not front page, but present, an exposé on custodial fund mismanagement in family-owned financial firms. No names at first. Then one article slipped through with my father's initials. The board couldn't ignore it anymore. I got the confirmation email at 7:42 a.m. He'd been placed on indefinite leave pending full audit. But the final blow? That came in person. We crossed paths at the courthouse. I was filing an additional petition, ensuring the wedding fund couldn't be touched during proceedings. She was there trying to meet with a lawyer of her own. She looked smaller than I remembered. Makeup blurred, heels uneven. Her confidence had always been her currency, and now she was bankrupt. She approached me cautiously, voice low. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I turned. "You just didn't care if you did." Her lips trembled. She looked around like she might find a way out in the empty corridor. "You've made your point," she said, reaching for control, still clinging to the idea that she could talk her way through it. I stared at her, no heat, no rage. Just clarity. "This was never about a point," I said. "It was about truth. And consequences." She stepped closer, a flicker of desperation beneath her veneer. "I'll give it back. All of it. Just, make this stop. Please. It's ruining everything." There it was. Please. The word she'd never used when she took what was mine. Not when she lied, not when she manipulated my fiancé, not when she watched me walk down an aisle to no one. Please. Not for forgiveness, but for survival. I leaned in just enough so only she could hear. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you convinced everyone I wouldn't." Her face collapsed, shoulders caving, pride folding like paper. For a second, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered the altar. The silence. The laughter in her eyes when I returned home alone. The years of her winning because I refused to play. And now, the game was mine. I walked away, leaving her in that hallway, the first time she wasn't the one being followed, watched, admired. Just a girl stripped of power, clutching the edges of a world that no longer answered to her. And I didn't look back. The room was quiet, too quiet for a house that once pulsed with noise, opinions, and judgment. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just the hum of consequence settling into the wallpaper. I stood in the foyer, the same one where my father used to greet clients with charm and power in his voice. Now it was just me, and him, and the weight of everything he never thought he'd have to answer for. He didn't look up right away when I entered. Paper scattered on the table, his laptop open but idle. He wasn't working, he was searching. Desperate for a solution that didn't exist anymore. For years, he built his life on controlled outcomes. Clients who didn't ask questions. Daughters who played their roles. but now his license was under review. His name tied to scandal. And for once, he couldn't make a call to erase it. "I suppose you're here to celebrate," he said finally, voice clipped. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm here to end it." He scoffed. "And what, exactly?" "This lie. This family story where you get to decide what's real, who matters, who gets protected." His eyes met mine then. Tired, but still sharp. "Everything I did for this family." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You did it for control. And when I stopped playing my part, you chose her." He flinched. Just slightly. But it was there. "Your sister needed help," he said, like it explained everything. "And I needed parents," I said. But that never seemed urgent to anyone. The silence that followed was cavernous. Not awkward, just hollow. Empty of excuses. Empty of power. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply finished. And that, I think, unsettled him more than rage ever could. He tried again. "She's your sister. And I'm your daughter." Another silence. This one final. Upstairs, I heard a door creak open. My mother lingered at the landing but didn't come down. She hadn't spoken to me since the court hearing. Not a word. She looked thinner now. Sleep-deprived. Haunted by a public fall from grace she'd never anticipated. My mother lived for the perception of stability, of beauty, of flawless motherhood. And now? She couldn't curate this into something respectable. She couldn't even face me. I looked up at her, then turned away. Let her stay in her silence. Let her feel what I felt all my life, unacknowledged. My sister hadn't come home in days. Her apartment was under review for asset seizure, and she was scrambling. Friends no longer returned her messages. Brand deals had quietly pulled away. Her curated image of the adored daughter had cracked like porcelain. She still called sometimes. Left voicemails that swung between denial and desperation. But I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. She needed something from me she could no longer have, immunity. I walked into the office, my father's sanctuary, once off limits unless summoned. The shelves lined with degrees, trophies, family photos where I stood slightly behind, slightly blurred. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on his desk. "What's this?" "Final release form. If you sign it, you agree to full repayment of the fund, transfer of the remaining assets into my control, and withdrawal from the Compliance Board's appeals process." He stared at it like it might bite him. "If you don't sign," I continued, "the investigation proceeds. And the civil suit expands. I've already filed for discovery on your offshore accounts. Don't worry. I kept the press out of it, for now." He didn't argue. Just sat back in his chair, I scanning the paper. The illusion of control faded from his face. And in its place, something I'd never seen before. Not fear. Not anger. Respect. He signed it. Not because he believed he was wrong. But because he knew he'd lost. And maybe, somewhere in that cold, calculated mind of his, he realized that blood doesn't protect you from consequences. Not when you've made your own child your casualty. As I left the office, I passed the framed family photo hanging in the hallway. A glossy image of perfection. All smiles. All lies. I paused. Looked at the girl in the photo, the one trying so hard to belong. Then I took it off the wall. Outside, the wind was soft, carrying the smell of rain. I stood in the driveway for a moment, envelope in hand, photo under my arm, breathing in the air like it was mine again. No one followed me out. No one called after me. The house stood still, held together by silence and shame. I got in my car, started the engine, and for the first time I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel small. It's strange, the weight we carry from being unwanted in spaces that claim to love us. But the truth is, healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. It doesn't always come with apologies or clarity. Sometimes, healing is simply walking away with the truth. With your name cleared. Your power reclaimed. Your silence weaponized into freedom. I won. Not because they said sorry. Not because they changed. But because I did. I never needed their approval. I just needed the room to see them for who they were. And now that I do? They can't touch me. Ever again. And I still haven't listened to her last voicemail. Maybe I never will. The story ends not with a grand explosion, but with a haunting echo, the kind that follows you into empty rooms. I don't need applause. I don't need revenge speeches or dramatic exits. I have something better, consequences that speak for themselves. I walk away not just financially restored, but legally vindicated. Everything they thought they could take from me, my reputation, my independence, my voice, was never really theirs to keep. The money was reclaimed. The lies exposed. The silence weaponized. And the victory? It was psychological. They will live every day knowing I saw through their masks and dismantled them piece by piece, without ever having to raise my voice. My family fractured not by my hand, but by their own decisions. Loyalty was their demand, but manipulation was their currency. And in the end, I paid it back in truth. Cold. Clean. Permanent. The final closure isn't about them. It's about me. About reclaiming the space I shrank in for years. Love that demands erasure is not love. Family that punishes boundaries is not family. And survival isn't just walking away, it's walking away without looking back. They taught me who I was by trying to erase me, and I proved it by surviving without them. Before you go, ask yourself, where's your breaking point, and who are you, when you finally stop apologizing?